The alien woman couldn't bear children until the human made her a mother. The starship descended through a violet sky, its polished hull reflecting the glow of a city unlike any Adrian Wolfe had ever seen. He pressed his face to the viewing pane, his breath caught in his chest. Aelthara, capital of the Nethari Empire, stretched below him like a dream pulled from myth. Crystal spires rose in clusters, their surfaces alive with shifting light that painted the skyline in silver and blue. Bridges arched high above rivers of liquid light, and the avenues below shimmered as if paved with glass. It should have been a sight of triumph, a city that proved the greatness of a people. Yet as Adrian gazed closer, he felt an ache beneath the wonder. There were no sounds of laughter, no children chasing each other through the markets, no playful shouts echoing through the towers. Where there should have been music and life, there was a hush, as though the city itself mourned. His heart tightened when their convoy passed an open courtyard that had once been a nursery. Play structures stood abandoned, their bright colors dulled by time, their silence heavier than any ruin. Adrian had read the reports before leaving Earth. He knew the Nethari were dying. Centuries ago, their birth rates had begun to fall. Decade by decade, cradle by cradle, their people dwindled. Now an entire civilization, proud and radiant, stood on the edge of extinction. He had studied genetics all his life, but never had his research felt as urgent as it did in that moment. The delegation's transport slid to a stop at the base of a massive stairway that climbed toward the royal palace. The structure was carved from living crystal, glowing softly in the twilight. Soldiers stood in formation, their armor polished to a mirror's gleam, their silver-violet faces stern and unreadable. A hush swept through the courtyard as the human delegation disembarked. Adrian walked at the rear, clutching the satchel that carried his research tools. He had not come as a diplomat, nor as a warrior, but as a scientist. Yet when his eyes rose to the towering gates of the palace, he wondered if he had stepped into something far greater than science. Inside, the air shimmered faintly with the hum of energy woven into the very walls. Murals of ancient battles and coronations stretched across vaulted ceilings, but even in their artistry, there was a recurring image: mothers holding infants, families gathered in circles of light. It struck him as almost cruel, a reminder of what they had lost. The delegation was ushered through a grand hall toward a dais at its center. And there she stood, Queen Yelara. Adrian had read her name on countless documents, seen stylized portraits that failed to capture her. Nothing had prepared him for the truth. She was taller than any human, her presence radiating command. Her skin shimmered like moonlight on water, shifting in hues of silver and violet with every subtle motion. Her long obsidian hair fell like a river down her back, and her eyes, sharp, unyielding, held the room in silence. When she spoke, her voice was steady, resonant, but beneath its strength was sorrow. She welcomed the delegation, acknowledging the effort it had taken to cross the stars, but wasted no time on ceremony. She told them the truth plainly. The Nethari were dying. No child had been born in nearly a decade. Their scholars had searched every path, their healers had tried every remedy, and still, the cradles remained empty. Then her gaze shifted, locking on Adrian. He felt pinned, as though she saw through the layers of his training, his caution, even his fear. She spoke his name. She spoke of his research into hybridization, of his breakthroughs with dormant genes, and of the possibility, small, fragile, but real, that humanity might hold what her people had lost. Adrian wanted to step back, to vanish behind the others. But the Queen's eyes held him. She said there was one way to know, not through machines, not through charts or vials, through an ancient rite older than their empire itself. A ritual of binding, where energy and blood entwined, revealing truths science could not. Her words sent a chill through him. He was a man of logic, of data and microscopes. Rituals had no place in his world. And yet, here, in the shimmering light of the Nethari throne room, her voice made the impossible sound undeniable. Then she spoke the words that struck him harder than any scientific proposal. She asked him, Adrian Wolfe, to undergo the test himself. The hall fell into silence. The delegation shifted uneasily. Adrian's pulse thundered in his ears. He had expected to advise, to analyze, perhaps to experiment at the edge of the unknown. He had never imagined being asked to stand at the center of it. The queen did not look away. Her expression was regal, commanding, but her eyes betrayed a glimmer of something else. Desperation. A sadness so profound it seemed to hollow the air between them. Adrian swallowed hard. His mind screamed against the absurdity, but his heart, shaken by the abandoned nurseries, by the silent city, and by the plea in the eyes of a queen, whispered something else. Perhaps he had not come here to study life. Perhaps he had come here to give it. And so, against every instinct, Adrian Wolfe lowered his head before the queen of the Nethari and agreed. They led Adrian through corridors that seemed to hum with unseen power. The walls glowed faintly with shifting lines of light, like veins carrying energy instead of blood. Every step echoed with a sense of inevitability. The delegation had been dismissed. This was no longer a matter for committee or council. It was personal, and Adrian knew there was no turning back. The chamber of the ritual was unlike anything he had expected. It was not a laboratory, not a sterile hall of glass and steel. Instead, it was carved from crystal so pure it seemed to breathe with the light of stars. Symbols shimmered along the floor in intricate circles, glowing softly in a rhythm like a heartbeat. Vessels of silver liquid floated in the air, rotating gently as if caught in invisible currents. The healers were waiting, tall, robed figures with skin like burnished silver, their faces solemn, their hands moving with ritual precision. Their voices rose together, low and melodic, a chant in a language Adrian could not understand but somehow felt deep in his bones. The sound vibrated through his chest, unsettling yet mesmerizing. Queen Yelara stood at the edge of the circle, her gaze never leaving him. Her presence steadied him even as fear clawed at his chest. She raised one hand, and the healers beckoned him forward. Adrian stepped into the circle. The air thickened immediately, heavy and electric, prickling his skin. Runes along the floor flared brighter. A warmth spread through his feet, rising swiftly up his legs until his whole body burned with an unnatural heat. The healers placed their hands on his shoulders, their touch firm but strangely gentle. One of them pressed a silver blade against his palm, cutting just enough to draw blood. The drops fell onto the glowing symbols, and the entire chamber pulsed with light. Adrian gasped as the warmth became fire, surging through his veins. Visions assaulted him. He saw galaxies unfolding, rivers of light weaving together, forms shifting and merging. He saw Nethari children, their laughter echoing, then fading into silence. He saw Yelara, standing alone on a throne surrounded by shadows. The images overwhelmed him, too much, too fast, pressing against the edges of his mind until he thought it would shatter. Pain struck like lightning through his chest. His knees buckled, but unseen hands held him upright. His pulse hammered wildly, every beat sending shockwaves through his body. He cried out, but the chant grew louder, drowning his voice. His vision blurred, his body trembling under forces he could not comprehend. He locked eyes with Yelara for a moment. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes burned with intensity. He thought he saw fear there, or perhaps sorrow, but then the fire within him surged higher, and he could no longer focus. The world tilted, the chamber spun, and then darkness. When Adrian woke, he was lying in a chamber he did not recognize. The ceiling glowed softly, casting the room in pale silver light. His body felt heavy, his skin damp with sweat. His muscles ached as if he had run for miles. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream, some fevered vision brought on by exhaustion. But then the door slid open and she entered. Queen Yelara. She moved without her crown, without the ceremonial armor that had made her seem untouchable. She wore a simple robe of deep violet, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked less like an untouchable sovereign and more like a woman carrying unbearable weight. Adrian tried to sit up, but the effort sent a sharp pain through his chest. Yelara crossed the room quickly, placing a hand on his shoulder to steady him. Her touch was firm, grounding, but her eyes betrayed turmoil. "You survived," she said softly. Her voice, usually commanding, carried a tremor. Adrian swallowed. His throat was dry. What happened? For a long moment, she did not answer. She stood over him, her hand lingering on his shoulder, her gaze searching his face as if trying to measure how much truth he could bear. Finally, she spoke. "The ritual revealed something we did not believe possible." Adrian's pulse quickened. He shook his head weakly. "What do you mean?" Yelara's lips pressed together before the words came, heavy and slow. "You carry life, Adrian Wolfe. Within you, a spark has taken root, the first in generations." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Adrian stared at her, uncomprehending. The meaning of her words struck him like a blow. He laughed once, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "That is impossible." But Yelara did not flinch. Her hand moved from his shoulder to his chest, just over his heart. "It is real. Our healers confirmed it. The ritual bound your essence with mine. Somehow, your body has accepted what no Nethari body could. You carry the child of our people." Adrian's stomach turned. His mind raced, searching for explanations, for denials. His body, his identity, his very sense of self rebelled. He had come as a scientist, not as some vessel for impossible experiments. Horror twisted in his chest, mingling with fear, confusion, and an anger that left him trembling. "I cannot," he whispered. His voice cracked. "This is not what I came here for." Yelara's expression softened. For the first time, the queen looked vulnerable. Her hand remained over his heart, her touch strangely tender. "You are not alone," she said. "Whatever this means, whatever comes, I will stand with you. I swear it on my crown, on my people, on my own life. You will not face this burden abandoned." Adrian closed his eyes. His breath came ragged. He wanted to scream, to deny it all, to demand the world return to the way it had been only days before. But deep within the storm of his thoughts, a faint, impossible awareness stirred in his body. Something new, something fragile. He shivered, uncertain whether from terror or awe. Whispers traveled faster than fire through dry grass. By the time Adrian could walk the palace corridors again, servants paused mid-step to bow, their eyes lingering with awe or fear. Guards straightened when he passed, some saluting stiffly, others narrowing their eyes as though they faced a threat. In the council halls, nobles leaned close to one another, speaking in hushed tones. Some called him a miracle, the savior of their dying empire. Others spat the word abomination under their breath, convinced his existence was a violation of nature itself. Adrian felt the weight of every glance. He pressed his hands against his stomach sometimes, unable to ignore the subtle changes within. His body was no longer entirely his own, and the thought filled him with unease. He had studied life in test tubes, observed cells dividing under microscopes, but never imagined he would become the experiment. The loneliness pressed harder than the fear. The delegation that had brought him here treated him like a stranger now. They offered polite distance, unwilling to involve themselves in what was unfolding. Adrian had no one he trusted, no anchor to hold on to, except for the woman who had set this path in motion, Queen Yelara. At first, he resisted her presence. He did not want comfort from the one who had asked this of him, but she came anyway. When pain gripped his body in sudden waves, she was there, steadying him with hands that were both strong and gentle. When the whispers in the hall became unbearable, she walked beside him openly, silencing his critics with a single glare. One night, when the ache in his chest grew sharp, she dismissed the healers and stayed alone with him. She cooled his forehead with a cloth, her long fingers brushing strands of damp hair from his face. For the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been carrying a dying empire on her shoulders, standing unyielding before her people. Yet here she sat at his bedside like an ordinary woman with too many burdens. Adrian found himself studying her in moments of quiet. The sharp planes of her face softened when she thought no one watched. The shimmer of her skin was not just regal but strangely vulnerable under candlelight. He began to see her not only as a queen, but as a woman who had known loneliness far longer than he had. It was during one of those quiet nights that the first true spark passed between them. She reached to steady his hand as another wave of pain struck, and for a breath, neither let go. Her fingers lingered, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that left his heart unsteady. Neither spoke of it, but something unspoken passed between them. That fragile warmth was shattered days later. The attack came without warning. A tray of food delivered to his chamber carried the faint scent of something metallic. Adrian's instincts made him pause, but his hesitation was brief. The guard who had brought it urged him to eat. Suspicion flared too late. The moment Adrian set the tray aside, shadows moved in the corners of the chamber. Blades flashed in the dim light. Assassins. Adrian stumbled back, his body sluggish, panic rising. One of the killers lunged at him, dagger aimed for his chest. He froze, certain it would end there. But before the blade struck, a blur of violet light swept across the room. Queen Yelara. She moved with terrifying grace, her sword drawn, the edge gleaming like starlight. The dagger never reached him. Instead, the assassin crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering uselessly. Another leapt from the shadows, only to be met with a strike so swift Adrian barely saw it. The chamber filled with chaos. Steel against steel, bodies colliding, shouts and gasps. Adrian pressed against the wall, clutching his stomach, his breath ragged. He was helpless, every instinct screaming at him to run. Yet something deeper kept him rooted. He could not abandon what had begun to grow inside him. Yelara fought like a storm-given flesh. She met the last assassin head-on, disarming him with a twist and driving her blade through his chest. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths as she turned to him. There was blood on her blade, blood on her robe, but her eyes softened the moment they found his. She crossed the room in long strides, lowering her weapon, and reached for him. Adrian's hand trembled as he placed it in hers. The contact was warm, steadying. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither was queen nor outsider, savior nor burden. They were two people standing against a world determined to break them. That night, as the chamber was cleansed of blood and guards reinforced every door, Yelara stayed. She sat at his side, her hand brushing over his as though to remind him he was not alone. In the quiet hours, she spoke words she had never shared with her court. She told him of nights spent awake on a throne too vast for one, of the weight of a crown that never lightened, of scars hidden beneath ceremonial robes. She spoke of loneliness so deep it had hollowed her for years. Adrian listened, his chest aching not from pain but from the raw honesty in her voice. For the first time, he saw her stripped of all titles and defenses. And when she fell silent, he found himself reaching for her hand without hesitation. They stood together on a balcony later, the city spread below, silent and glowing under starlight. Yelara placed her hand gently over his stomach, her touch reverent. Adrian did not pull away. The warmth of her skin seeped into him, stirring something he could no longer deny. In that moment, surrounded by silence and stars, Adrian realized that what had begun as fear and obligation was transforming into something else. Something fragile, dangerous, and yet undeniably real. He was no longer just a vessel for survival. He was becoming something more. The storm came without warning, though perhaps the whispers had always hinted at it. In the grand council chamber, nobles stood in their jeweled robes, their faces lit by the glow of towering crystal pillars. Adrian had accompanied Yelara reluctantly, his presence drawing stares that cut sharper than knives. He thought it would be another session of tense debate, another day of suspicion wrapped in polite words. But this time the air was different, too still, too heavy. A noble named Vorith, one of Yelara's closest counselors, stepped forward. His silver-violet skin shimmered with authority, his voice carrying a weight that made even guards shift uneasily. He spoke not of policy or diplomacy, but of purity. He declared Adrian a corruption, a blight upon their people, a dangerous mutation that must be cut away before it spread. Yelara rose to her full height, her eyes blazing. She called him traitor, but her words were drowned in the sudden roar of agreement from half the chamber. One by one, nobles tore off their ceremonial cloaks, revealing armor hidden beneath. Guards loyal to the conspirators drew their blades. It was not a council meeting. It was a coup. Adrian barely had time to react before chaos exploded. Steel clashed against steel, shouts filled the chamber, and fire spread as torches toppled. Yelara's loyalists formed a circle around her, blades flashing as they fought back the tide. Adrian stood frozen at first, heart hammering, until a dagger whistled past his ear. Instinct drove him forward, ducking low as another blow nearly struck his side. He had no weapon, no training, but survival demanded movement. Yelara seized his arm. Her grip was strong, unyielding. "Come," she commanded, her voice sharp even through the din. They fled down a side passage, guards falling in around them, though not enough. The palace shook with the force of battle. Smoke curled along the vaulted ceilings, screams echoing in the distance. Adrian stumbled as the ground trembled. His body still weak from the changes within, but he refused to falter. They reached a hidden door carved into the wall, a tunnel few in the palace knew existed. The guards urged them inside. The air grew cooler, darker, lit only by faint glowing lines etched into the stone. Adrian's breath came hard, every step a struggle, but he pressed on. Behind them, footsteps echoed, assassins sent to finish what the coup had begun. Adrian turned to Yelara, panic surging. "Go! Leave me! Save yourself!" Her eyes blazed in the dim light, and she seized his face in her hands with a fierceness that silenced him. "I will not abandon you. You are not only the bearer of our hope. You are mine." Her words struck deeper than any blade. Something inside him broke open, all his fear and doubt spilling away. In their place rose a resolve he had never known. "I will not leave you either," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. "Not now, not ever." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to only them. The roar of battle faded, the flicker of torches dimmed. Yelara's hand lingered against his cheek, her thumb brushing softly against his skin. And then, in that desperate corridor, with death closing in, their lips met. The kiss was fierce, not born of softness but of survival, of defiance, of love forged in fire. It ended as quickly as it began, broken by the approaching footsteps. They pulled apart, but something unshakable had been sealed between them. The assassins struck moments later. Blades gleamed in the dark. Adrian stumbled back as Yelara's sword clashed with theirs. Loyal guards threw themselves into the fight, buying precious moments. Adrian snatched a fallen blade, its weight awkward in his hand, but he gripped it with determination. He had never fought before, but when one of the attackers lunged at Yelara's unguarded side, Adrian swung wildly, the blade scraping across armor but knocking the assassin off balance. Yelara finished the strike with practiced precision, and for the first time, Adrian felt the strange, raw thrill of standing his ground. They pushed forward, through smoke and blood, until at last they emerged into the heart of the palace. Fire had spread across the grand hall, shadows dancing against walls that had once held glory. Vorith stood at the far end, his blade drawn, his voice rising above the chaos. He called Yelara unfit, a queen who would doom them all for the sake of an outsider's child. His words stoked the fury of those still loyal to him, and the clash resumed with brutal ferocity. Yelara did not falter. With Adrian at her side, she charged into the fray. The battle blurred. Flashes of steel, shouts, blood on marble floors. Adrian fought clumsily but with a desperation that drove him through fear. Twice he stumbled, twice Yelara saved him, but once, just once, it was Adrian who blocked the blow meant for her. Their eyes met in the chaos, and no words were needed. The fight raged until loyal guards forced Vorith's faction to retreat. The last of the traitors fell, the palace ringing with silence once more. Smoke hung heavy in the air, the scent of blood and ash clinging to every surface. Adrian collapsed to his knees, the sword slipping from his hand. His chest heaved, his body trembling. Yelara knelt beside him, her arms sliding around his shoulders, steadying him as she always had. Together they rose, bloodied but unbroken. Before the watching eyes of her court, Yelara declared the coup ended. Her voice rang with power, but when she looked at Adrian, her gaze softened, carrying a promise that went beyond politics or power. They had survived the storm, and together they would face whatever came next. The palace healed slowly after the coup. The smoke was cleared, the broken walls rebuilt, the traitors either executed or banished. But scars remained, on the halls, on the people, and within Adrian himself. Yet through it all, a quiet strength grew between him and Yelara. Months passed in a blur of preparation and waiting. Adrian's body changed in ways he could never have imagined. He felt the weight, the ache, the fluttering life within him. Fear never left entirely, but it was tempered by wonder. There were nights when he could not sleep, when every doubt he had ever carried returned to torment him. But Yelara was always there. She sat beside him in silence when words would not suffice. She held him through the pain. She placed her hand gently over his stomach, whispering promises in the language of her people, ancient words meant to guard the unborn. There were moments of tenderness he never thought possible. Laughter shared in private chambers, warmth beneath starlight, fleeting smiles exchanged across crowded halls. He no longer saw her as only a queen or as the woman who had drawn him into this destiny. She was his anchor, his companion, his love. The day of birth came with a silence heavier than battle. Adrian lay in a chamber washed in silver light, surrounded by healers whose hands glowed with energy. Yelara stood beside him, her fingers gripping his tightly, her strength flowing into him. Pain tore through his body, sharper than any blade. He cried out, his voice breaking, his grip crushing hers. He thought he would shatter under the strain, but Yelara's voice anchored him. She spoke his name again and again, steady, fierce, refusing to let him drift into despair. Hours passed like lifetimes, and then, at last, a cry broke the silence. It was not his cry, but a child's. The healers lifted the newborn high, and light seemed to bend around the small, fragile body. The child bore skin that shimmered faintly like the nethari, but softer, tinged with human warmth. Tiny fingers curled, tiny lungs wailed, and for the first time in generations, the Empire heard the sound of new life. Tears blurred Adrian's vision. He reached out trembling hands, and the child was placed in his arms. The warmth, the weight, the sheer reality of it overwhelmed him. His breath caught as he stared down at the miracle resting against his chest. Yelara's hand cupped his cheek, guiding his gaze upward. Her eyes glistened with tears she did not try to hide. "Our child," she whispered. "Not mine. Not yours. Ours." Words spread faster than fire. Nobles and servants gathered outside the chamber, their disbelief turning to awe. One by one, they fell to their knees, not in fear, but in reverence. The first child of a new age, half human and half nethari, had been born. Adrian sat there, cradling the newborn, Yelara beside him. He thought of the man he had been when he first arrived, a scientist searching for answers, a stranger in a dying empire. Now he was something else entirely, a father, partner, a piece of a destiny larger than anything he had ever imagined. Later, in a hall filled with the Empire's surviving leaders, Yelara stood tall. But this time she did not stand alone. She drew Adrian forward, their child in his arms, and before all, she crowned him not as an outsider, not as a subject of curiosity, but as her husband and chosen mate. The hall erupted in voices, some joyous, some uncertain, but none could deny the truth standing before them. Hope had been born. Adrian looked at Yelara, at the child sleeping in his arms, and felt a peace he had never known. All the pain, the fear, the loneliness, they had led him here, to family, to love, to life itself. As the crowd's voices echoed, Adrian held his child close and whispered words meant only for Yelara, but carried in his voice was the truth of an empire reborn. "In the union of two worlds," he said softly, "love gave birth not only to a child, but to hope itself." The hall fell into silence, And in that silence, a new age began.